Hey folks, Dr. Mike Israetel here for Renaissance Periodization and Strength Training Made Simple, video number 6. If you want to check out the other videos, we already have them loaded in the playlist before. How many sets should you do in order to maximize strength adaptations? Let's find out. So first question is how many sets per movement per session? Like how many sets of pushing or bench pressing or squatting per session? So if you come in, you have to do some squats. How many sets of squats is maybe too few, maybe too many, and what's that sort of right golden amount? Well, on the low end, you want to do enough number of sets to drive the best strength adaptations. Now, it turns out that you can have a pretty high frequency of training and only do as little as one hard working set per session and get really great results. So at least one heavy working set per session is totally fine. Now, on the other hand, as you train for weeks and weeks and weeks, eventually you should hit your maximum recoverable volume, a volume that you are working so hard at that you can't recover from any more than that, and you actually underperform if you go in excess of that. That means maybe you just do one set every time, but you can train for 12 weeks on end, and then the fatigue comes down and crushes you and it's too much. Or you go from one set all the way up to 4 or 5 sets, and then only 4 or 5 weeks later, that's too much volume because the fatigue catches up and the volume is rising, and then it's too much. So you definitely want to train enough to, first of all, do at least one hard working set, not really an answer, and 2, to challenge yourself towards the end of your cycles. Essentially, if you're deloading when you still feel great and you still feel like you could do more work, you could probably have been doing more work. So if someone says like, yeah, I only ever trained with 1 set per session, someone's like, have you ever tried training with 2? And I'm like, yeah, no, that would be too much. I'm like, how do you know? Like, I don't. Well, maybe you should try training with more, because you could, more sets is more stimulus and potentially more strength gain. And all the actual formal literature, it's very hard to get the best adaptations from just 1 working set per session. There are some exceptions, but usually more working sets per session, like 2, 3, or 4, is better. It just makes you stronger faster or makes you more stronger. So give that some thought. Now, you say, okay, 1 is good, 2 might be better, 3 might be better, 4 might be better. Where's the top end for that? Clearly, there's such a thing as too much. Here are some answers. First of all, if you are developing muscle size for strength, okay, not just for its own sake like bodybuilding, but getting the muscles bigger to make them stronger later, we're primarily going to be training with sets of 5 to 10. And the most productive loading range for that is things above 75% of your 1RM. So if you're doing squats and you're doing set after set after set, and in order to continue to do sets of at least 5, if you have to lower the weight on the bar to below 75%, of your fresh 1 rep max in the squat, you're doing too much work, because then all of those sets after are so light that they're not really creating the kind of muscle growth that's best to make you stronger. It's what's called junk volume. Oh, you're training all right, but it's not really making you as good as it could possibly be. You're much better off stopping training, switching to another exercise, another muscle group, so on and so forth, another lift, and or going home and just coming back in a different session when you're more fresh and putting in high quality work. The definition of high quality work here is sets of 5 to 10, at least at 75% of your 1 rep max. Now, same kind of rule for basic strength training. Actually getting strong, sets of 3 to 6, you should be able to do with at least 82.5% or so, just an average figure, of your 1 rep max. So if you're so tired that you're doing 70% of your 1RM for sets of 3 to 6, you are not training for strength anymore. You're just training for moving around, right? It's probably not why you're in the gym. You're probably watching this because you want to get stronger, so keep that in mind. So hard cutoff is if you can't lift sufficient amount of weight, 82.5%. In this case, for basic strength, sets of 3 to 6, it's time to leave the gym. It's time to shut it down. For you, that might occur after 5 sets. It might occur after 3. It might occur after 8. Who knows? But that's your answer right there. It's different for everybody. Limit strength development. When you're talking about peaking strength, sets of 1 to 3, if you're doing sets of 1 to 3 and you're down because of fatigue, because you've done so many sets, to below about 87.5% of your 1 rep max, you're training too light. It's no longer limit strength. It's just not a limit weight anymore. You're just tired and you need to switch the lift or go home or something like that. Now, another consideration for volume. You do a certain amount of volume, certain number of sets per session, and then you do another session, another session, another session. If you do so much volume in one session that your strength doesn't recover and adapt to become greater in the next session after, you've probably done too much. So for example, if you do 4 sets of squats on Monday, and by Wednesday, you do again 4 sets of squats, except now you're stronger in the squat, all is well, and that 4 sets of squats is not too much. But if you've done 8 sets of squats on Monday, and Wednesday, you're so beat up from squats that you're actually a little bit weaker or just about the same, you're violating the core tenet of progressive overload of strength training, which is to make things heavier over time. That's the only way to get stronger. Duh. So maybe 8's a bit too much. If you lower it to 4, you can make those jumps. You're not in the gym for strength training to try to beat yourself up as much as possible. You're there to get that great stimulus and get out to set up the next productive session. Lastly, if you have overlapping soreness into sessions, it's probably too many sets. So if you're doing 8 sets of bench press, and the next time you do bench press, your pecs are wildly sore, your triceps are sore, and you can't put out the kind of force you're supposed to because soreness interferes with maximum force production and it risks injury considerably more than if you're not sore, being that you're training for strength. Those are heavy loads. You don't want to be sore for your heavy loads. When that's the case, it's too much volume. Now, we all have these Napoleonic big eyes that open up. Man, I could get so much better doing 4 sets or 6 sets or 8 sets if you cannot recover, which means you're not stronger next time that you plan to squat or bench or deadlift or whatever. And or if you're still sore, volume is that big thing we change. Do fewer sets. There is nobody around counting your sets and being like, oh, you're doing 8. That's really good. Nobody cares. Some of the strongest people in the world do 2 or 3 sets per movement per session, and they're awesome. It's just what you can recover from and have high quality workouts, not just now, but the next time and the next time and the next time. If you do too much volume at once, you could screw that process over and not be able to build up like that. Now, to keep it simpler, sort of a 4-point guide here. If you're not training close to your heaviest, it's not going to make you much stronger. So if you're squishing in volume, but you have to reduce the load just to be able to do sets of 5, stupid idea. So never do that. Number 2, if you're training so much that you can't hit a PR next session or next week, like a relative PR, a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, you're training too much. You should probably consider training less. Number 3, if you're training so much that you're sore in the next session repeatedly, you're like, yeah, I'm trying to get stronger hamstrings, doing stuff like deadlifts, I'm sore all the time. Do not be sore all the time. You can get sore, but make sure your soreness heals completely by the time you train hamstrings again. That's a really good idea. And if after a whole mesocycle progression of session to session to session, if you're deloading, but you could have still hit a PR if you didn't deload, you're either not training for long enough at a time, you should delay your deload to later, or the average volume you're doing, number of sets every week, is just too low. A deload should come when you cannot give anymore. Like that last workout, you rack the bar and someone's like, we think next week, 5 more pounds on the bar, same number of sets. You're like, no way, I will be weaker next week. If that's the case, you earned your deload. If that's not the case, and you're like, yeah, I could probably go up, either don't deload, continue to apply volume at the same volume you were, or look back on your accumulation phase and next time, do more, because you want to push your limits towards the end, and volume is a big way in which you do it. Now, what about total sets per session, not per muscle group? For example, let's say we're squatting and benching in one session. So we already know the answer is whatever drops out of those weight zones and whatever makes you too sore and so on and so forth. But what about sort of everything that you do, the total actual session itself? So for any of the respective exercises that you do or the muscle groups that you train in movement patterns like squatting and pressing and so on and so forth, if they fall below for hypertrophy for strength 75, for basic strength 82.5, for peaking 87.5, then you're probably done. Okay, now that means, check this out, you squatted first, you bench after. How many sets of bench? Well, benching is still compared to its fresh 1RM. So if you're doing basic strength for squats, sets of 3 to 6, then basic strength for bench, sets of 3 to 6. That sets of 3 to 6 for bench is not adjusted RM-wise like, yeah, but like what's my 1RM if I've done squats? No, it's on an absolute scale. So your fresh bench 1RM is what you still compare it to. And if you can't move that for sets of 3 to 6 at least 82.5% of your fresh 1RM in the bench, you're done. So if you're thinking right now, like, wait a minute, that only means I might be able to do 2 or 3 sets in the bench if it's not a first exercise. That is exactly correct, which is why a lot of people a really good at strength program is say you can really only have one main focus exercise in any one session if you get sufficiently advanced. Oh yeah, you can squat, bench, and deadlift in the same day, but that deadlift at the end are going to be very few sets and probably not that impressive as far as rep range because you are very quickly going to have so much systemic fatigue, you're not going to be able to lift heavy enough to count it as strength training anymore. Any much more than that is just junk volume. You're moving around, not much is happening. So if it's not heavy enough to sort of at least be increasing your strength, why are you doing it? Even if it feels heavy. Here's a real crazy mind warp for you. If you're so tired that your normal 20 RM in the bench is something, 60% of your inner max. If you're so tired that you're benching it for sets of 3 and you're like, it's sets of 3, it's strength training. It's not. It's just fatigue training, and it's causing much more harm than it is good. So if you're not fresh enough to perform at your top level, you're done, which is why the vast majority of the elite and the strength world have sessions that aren't that long, and they have many of them throughout the week, especially Olympic weightlifters. Either hit it fresh and hit it hard. Once you fatigue, it's time to shut it down because that's too much, right? So if you can't hit a triple, okay, with 82.5%, if you're fresh 1RM, you're very fatigued, you should probably shut it down. Now, all this stuff is theory, and I'm sure you've put together a plan of like, okay, it's about this many sets for me, and maybe I'll go to the gym and find out. Let's just throw some numbers at these. These are reference values, they're averages, they're not dogma, they're not religion. Just keep them in mind so you're not entirely unmoored from reality when you go try this yourself. Movement sets per session, like how many sets of squats should I be doing per session when I train for optimal strength? Usually between 2 and 5 sets. If someone's doing like 6 sets of squats in one workout, I'm like, maybe they're training more for hypertrophy and less for strength. Okay, between 2 and 5 is a good estimate for you to begin exploring, probably on the lower end of that, and work up as needed. What about total session? For strength training work, for that core work, yeah, some accessory assistance stuff maybe you can add towards the end, but it's questionable value anyway. For your core work in a session to make you stronger or build the muscle for strength, that's a 5 to 10. More than 15 total heavy work sets is on that upper limit, okay? Total for the session. So if you do 5 sets of squats, kind of a strange workout, 5 sets of bench, and 5 sets of deadlifts, think about that. These are all hard deadlifts. These are all hard squats, hard benches. This is not including warm-up sets, right? But they don't count. Warm-up sets are all their own. These are working sets. How much more can you ask of yourself than that? And if someone's doing a whole lot more, if you tell me, hey, listen, I do 30 work sets for strength per session, I'm going to tell you 2 things. 1, it's probably not optimal. And 2, it would be more optimal if you, instead of 30, took 15 and 15 and did more sessions per week. So for example, if you're doing, let's say, 3 workouts per week, and each one is 30 sets per session, maybe do 5 or 6 workouts per week and do like 15 each time. And I almost guarantee you'll have better results. Folks, thanks for tuning in. See you next time for the next video in this series.